We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. In the book of Daniel, it was the writing that appeared on the wall of King Belshazzar's palace, written by the unattached fingers of a human hand. Daniel is brought in to translate these mysterious words. The days of your reign are numbered. You have been weighed and measured and ultimately found wanting, and your kingdom will be torn asunder. With President Biden 1 year on the American throne, many are asking if the writing for his presidency is already on the White House walls. Just 1 year ago, Joe Biden became the 46th president of the United States of America. What should be an anniversary party feels more like a commemoration to better days gone by. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special show, we'll be weighing and measuring the Biden administration's performance after 12 months in office with a number of special guests, all experts in their fields. Now, I'd like to say a special thank you to our listeners on KSRM in Kenai, Alaska on 920 AM and 92.5 FM. Thanks for being part of the team. And remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Let's get started. Inflation at a 40-year high, gas prices hitting the poorest the hardest, energy on the verge of becoming a scarce commodity, and we're just 1 year into Bidenomics. Can it get any worse, and are there any remedies to make it any better? We're joined by economist and author Andrew Moran to figure out the economic cost of 12 months under Joe Biden. Welcome back to the show, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew, it's scorecard time. What rating do you give Joe Biden on the economy?
Well, I guess if it's out of a 10, probably a 3. And if it's a letter rating, perhaps a D or a D minus. You know, it's hard to find any redeeming qualities or achievements under Bidenomics. Everything has been a disaster. Usually when you have presidents, you can say, okay, well, this was a good thing and that's a good thing. So perhaps the only positive outcome I can see all this is that at least the budget deficit was lower. But that's not really due to President Biden or his policies. That's only due because last year this time, you know, not the whole country was open up yet. Many places are still closed. So deficit went down. I guess that's the only positive thing. But I'm sure next year, though, it's going to be up from this year.
Well, it's a situation back to normal, of course. Now, what are some of the main economic challenges that Americans have faced this last year?
Well, I think the main thing, of course, is the hot buzzword that's been dominating business, the business media, is that it's inflation. If you look at the CPI data, the latest one, the December Bureau of Labor Statistics report, everything was up across the board. Food was up, energy, electricity, apparel, used cars, medical services, everything was up. I think the only things that were down were girls' apparel and blinds. That was it. Everything else
that's you and I sorted for the weekend, Andrew, certainly.
You know, at any time that the public has gotten ahead, Bidenomics just reared its ugly head and erased those gains. So, you know, in this economy, it's really benefited the workers. The problem is that real wage growth is actually contracted. It's down. Last number I saw was, I think, 2.8%. So any wage gains that they've enjoyed over the last year has been completely gone. Interest rates, they're still at 0.
Let me just jump in on that, Andrew, for a second. So this is something we actually hear an enormous amount in let's call it the legacy media or the very pro-Biden media, as they say, wages have gone up. People are doing better than ever before, and we hear that. But when it comes to actual real wages, when you take into account the cost of rising goods, the inflation, they're actually doing worse off despite that number on their paycheck being larger than it was before. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. The last number I saw was also from the December jobs report, and it was that wage growth was up year over year 4.8% or 4.5%, and the average hourly earnings are about $31, a little more than $31. Wages have gone up considerably over last year because companies are so desperate to hire workers or retain their current crop of employees. Problem is CPI, PPI, the PCE price index, they've all skyrocketed over the last year at a four-decade high. So all these gains they're evaporated, they're gone. And then if you take into account interest rates, the real interest rate, it's negative. So if you're saving money, if you're somehow saving money in this economy, you're putting it to the bank, you're losing it because of all that price inflation that's going on. This is a terrible time. It's funny. This is the best of times and the worst of times. It's the best of times for workers, but it's the worst of times for the poor and middle class. Whether it's scarcity, shortages, inflation, it's a terrible trifecta, or it's a perfect storm for bad news.
Well, speaking of this perfect storm, Andrew, it does seem to me that each problem almost rolls into another, and that compounds the main issues. So is there any way for President Biden in his second year to reverse this, well, let's call it what it is, a perilous course for the American economy?
Yeah, I've suspected for a long time that the administration would launch a fourth stimulus check. A lot of Democrats have been pushing it over the since Biden went into office. I think that some Democrats want a perpetual stimulus check until the pandemic is over. If that doesn't happen, his next best option, which is unlikely to happen, but his next best option is to just stop spending money. This is one of the biggest contributing factors to the whole inflation saga, is that this new money is being injected into the economy, that all this liquidity, it's too much money chasing too few goods, and it's just not going to happen when it comes to stop spending money. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, she even conceded a few months ago that all this Biden spending has been a contributing factor to price inflation. Now, she didn't say it's the main factor, but at least she conceded that somewhat is adding to these inflationary pressures. Then even if he doesn't spend new money, he's still approving these outlandish multi-trillion-dollar spending bills without this Biden green agenda. And, fair to say, if a Republican were in office too, that person would still be approving, these $5-6 trillion deficit finance budgets, which is unsustainable, in the long term.
So once again, Andrew, I'm going to ask you to play Nostradamus or Cassandra, whichever you prefer. What do you see happening in the next year?
Well, Mark, it is time for us to do what we have been doing. And that time is every day. Every day, it is time for us to agree that there are things and tools that are available to us to slow this thing down.
Thank you, Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, for anybody who prefers their sentences with punctuation and reason, Andrew, do you have another prognostication for us?
Again, it goes back to that stimulus check. Perhaps you would try to bribe voters with their own money, but from the reports I've seen, the administration, they're trying to hit the reset button because of how dreadful the administration is performing. Biden's rating is at 40%. And, people don't like what he's doing. They don't like how he's handling inflation. They don't like how he's, managing the economy or whatever the case. Some strategists I've spoken to, they say that inflation's going to subside toward the end of the year. So perhaps if they're accurate, which, they're smart guys and gals. I engage them regularly, throughout the week. They know what they're doing. They're combing through this data. They're close to all these professionals, but these are the same people who said inflation would be transitory. Now, again, if they're accurate, I think this would give Biden some leeway to say, okay, fine, inflation's coming down, which means it gives us carte blanche to spend even more money come midterm elections, and therefore, you should support the Democrats to advance this agenda of, of more child tax payments, for example, or more student debt relief. Now, don't get me started to do student debt relief, but I think that's what he could do. He also said that the Fed he's confident the Fed could handle inflation, which, they have a poor track record, so I think that's going to happen. Overall, all I think he can do or he will do is just spend more money despite the inflation.
I think one of the most important questions that we can be asking, Andrew, is how this impacts folks out there. How are they going to manage? Because it's all well and good we talk about the printing of $1 trillion here or $500 million there. That doesn't really mean anything to your average guy and gal on the street. They're not seeing that, this is taking a fractional percent here, this is taking a fractional percent there, it's costing me a fractional percent more. So what are the real world impacts of what's been happening over the last year?
Well, inflation is essentially the debasement of your currency. As Howard Beale said in Network, a buck buys a nickel's worth. Those are real world consequences. You go to your bank account, you have to take more out to pay for the same level of goods. And if you're even lucky to get those goods, because there's scarcity is so prevalent throughout the U.S. economy and to be fair, the global economy too. All your savings, that's being eroded day by day. The only thing that I could see the average person do is just go in a stock market, buy a dividend-paying stock or index fund, and try to survive that way to beat inflation. But overall, it's very challenging for most poor and middle-class people to thrive in an inflationary environment. Some economists like Paul Krugman, they say that, inflation doesn't impact the poor and middle class, which is complete, balderdash. It's poppycock because the whole with inflation is that when you print money, the people closest to the spigot, the politicians, Wall Street, institutional investors, hedge funds, money managers, whatever the case, they benefit the most from that. Then when that money goes throughout the entire economy, $1 trillion worth, then everyone else gets pittance. They get this, this crumpled up Federal Reserve note. So yeah, these are real world impacts, and people see it every single day. They have been seeing it every day for the last year, despite everyone saying, "Oh, and what are you talking about? Inflation? It's not happening." And then they finally admit, "Yeah, you know what? Everybody was right. But you know what? Inflation is going to come down soon," which, it's hard to see that happening at all. Just one more thing. If you look at energy prices, I talked to some guys who say oil is going to come down, around November because all these companies are going to start producing more. The problem is that another strategist I spoke to, he was telling me that companies are so scared of pumping out more oil because of the whole regulatory uncertainty of the Biden green agenda. So that's going to add more pressure to the average person when it comes to filling up a tank of gasoline or even producing food, because of course energy is a major component of food production. So overall, I feel for a lot of people who are perhaps out of work, who run a small business. You see a lot of small businesses struggling in today's environment because of inflation and the renewed public health restrictions. So no, my heart goes out to a lot of people. Of course, my heart doesn't go out to politicians because they're the ones who cause this mess. But overall, most people, yeah, I feel for them.
Andrew Moran, thanks ever so much.
Thank you for having me.
Later in the show, we'll be continuing this weighing and measuring of Biden's first year in office by examining how your constitutional rights have fared under this president and this Congress. But next up, we'll be looking at the legislative hits and misses of the last 12 months. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
Daily tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a real